it, Dr. Red.
Okay, so welcome to day 2 of the Math Pathways Annual Summit. We had a fantastic day of presentations on Monday, including topics like proactive advising, co-requisite and support courses, leveraging cross-curricular design and creating a STAT course sequence, and involving partner disciplines in Math Pathways design. We even had a special visit from President Hans, who indicated that our task force had a friend in him. So we were really lucky in that regard, like both to get him and his sentiments. All in all, it was a great day of presentations and university share-outs. So I wanted to make sure to express thanks to Tamara and Michelle and Tracy and Beth and all of our presenters for helping to make day 1 a success. We expect that today's not going to be any different. We have some really great presentations lined up to try and keep us on schedule. We're going to try and get right to. I want to remind everyone of the Jamboard. Beth, I believe, is going to man or woman, I don't know, I want to be PC. But to put a link in the chat. I'm making sure that there's a chat always in the, a link always in the chat. It's a place where you can pose questions for our speakers or just make comments. And it serves 3 purposes. It's going to help to keep us on time. It's going to allow us to get to more questions, and it's going to provide a record for us to take back to those committees. So please don't hesitate to use it. So with that being said, we'll move on to our first speaker. So the work from Math Pathways naturally ended up leading us down certain paths. As we look deeper into the data, certain trends and outliers began to present themselves. Notably, one population was visibly not performing as well as some of the others. In that observation, the idea for impact was born, and impact is the Math Pathways for African American Collegiate Transformation. Many of the presentations are going to help to illuminate the needs or the underlying problems that make this group necessary, or they'll solicit feedback to help guide the group. To kick us off today, we're going to have a keynote from my co-chair for that committee, Dr. Roger Keith. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Good morning, good morning. So I can share my screen, right? So good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending. Corey, thank you for the opportunity, Michelle, the whole team. Today, I want to just discuss, have a presentation that I want to talk about some things that I'm doing and how the Math Pathways project came about. Excuse me, guys. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Let me see here. How about, there we go. All right, so once again, I'm Dr. Roger Keith. I'm the director of the Men's Achievement Center and the African American Male Initiative at North Carolina Central University. My presentation today is focused on 2 things, right? Validation and how do we move in the STEM society without leaving anybody behind. As we know, the UNC system is a unit of different universities that we all must work together in order to be successful. When you look at a system, it's like a bike link. If one of the links are off or broken, the system doesn't work. And so in order for everybody to be successful, this is what the Impact Project is truly about. And so today I don't want to harp on any failures, but when we talk about failures, we got to understand that out of failures, there comes great things, right? And so today, my presentation is Searching for Validation, the psychological impact of a STEM and mathematical-led society. And the reason I chose this is because, as we know, the world is changing. Just think about COVID, how the cryptocurrency has taken this boom and how money is seamlessly disappearing, but everything is done digitally. IT has taken off. Google is coming to the area, right? And so that's new opportunities for people financially and for students. And so the new model is going to be in a mathematical-led society. And so if these young men are not up to those standards, they will miss those opportunities. So before we get started, I want to tell you the story of Tim, right? And so the story of Tim, a young man raised in a rural area, raised by his grandparents, uneducated, didn't really finish high school, working grandparents. didn't really know nothing about the school structure, right? And so Tim never went to preschool. He always stayed with his grandparents, right? And so his grandparents had their way of teaching Tim how to learn and how to understand math. And so his grandparents had a farm, and so their thing was problem solving, right? And so they would give Tim these tasks to do, as simple as like, I need 10 carrots, 2 heads of cabbage, 10 corn, 10 shucks of corn, right? And just send him out there, right? And so as he came back, his grandmother would talk to him about the process of which one he picked first, why he should have cut it this way. And so she was teaching him problem solving from what we call an uneducated platform. But that was her way of learning math, and that's how she was taught. And what happened, it turns Tim into this great problem solver. But did it really teach him the foundations of math to be questioned later on within his college transition? And so as we look at this profile today, I wanted to start off with this profile. You see this profile, high school student, graduated with 3.5 GPA, ACT had a 22. You see the math scores. Enrolled at NCCU in 2017. His major was physics. You know, he was trying to do the +2 program where he goes to NC State. So as we look at his current GPA, 2.4 as it stands now. And so, like I said, he came in 2017, which this year is supposed to have been his graduation year. And so he's currently earned 79 credits, right? And so, but he's attempted 127 hours so far. So he's currently a junior. So he still has a long way to go. And so in the UNC system, you know, you need around 120 to graduate, right? And so as we look at this profile, you would think with him coming in with those scores, he would excel once he got into his major as far as mathematics. Oh, did it freeze up? Okay, here we go. And so as we look at the same student's profile, we have to move on. And so what I've been doing this year, at the end of the year, I've been giving my students a financial impact statement. And so what that is, we look at the number of classes they failed, we connect it to money and to math, and we show them, okay, you failed 5 classes. Multiply that by your credit hour, that's a down payment for a house. And so this particular student that we were just looking at, he's failed 13 classes, he's repeated 10, he's withdrawn for 3. So what I wanted to do was, what's the cost of that? So I set the student down. You know, the average per credit hour in the UNC system for 3 credit hours is $466. And so he's failed a total of 26 classes. So with that being said, to do the math, his financial loss was $12,000. But the key to this whole problem is that this student will have to take those classes over, which will total, if he passes all of them, around $24,000. That's if he passes those classes. So you would think about that before he even finishes his degree, and the UNC system price could change over time before he graduates, so that price could even scale even higher. But when you look at the totality of his math courses and his successes, where did we lose him? Where was the ball dropped? And this is not to put the onus on the math department. This is the thing where we have to look at and what makes math impact so important of this process that we're trying to put together. Because if this young man reaches the point where his prices surge, meaning after so many credit hours, those credit hours double. So they may go to $800 a credit hour. And so if we got to look at math, finances, how does this really affects this young man's career path after he graduates? And so I come to the conclusion, when do we become a dream stopper, or what they say, a dream killer? Or do we become a dream killer? Because that's one thing we are always taught: be whatever you want to be. You can be whatever you want to do if you put your mind to it. And so me, as a student of mine, I'm caught in the crossfire of, where do I tell this young man, do we make a left or a right? Do we continue down this path, or do we think about and reevaluate if this is the right major for you? So when I sit the young man down, he's saying, this is what I want to do. This is my plan. This is what I want to do in my life. But when I look at this financial sheet, I'm like, I don't know if this is the right course of action for you. So I want you guys to put in the chat, and we'll go over that later. When do you kill that dream? Or do I let this continue? Or how would you approach this as an advisor or as a chair of a department? When do we have these conversations with young men, and how do we allow them to get this far before we really intervene and like say, okay, we need to evaluate this before we let you get down. Like, meaning when he got to 10 classes, there should have been a meeting then to reevaluate how do we get you to the next level, or what course of action do we take next. So in the chat box, I want you to put your answer, your thought on when do we become a dream killer, or is being a dream killer wrong from a faculty, staff point of view, or parents point of view? When do we stop this bleeding? Because if we continue this, one, he may not graduate, or he may graduate with so much debt that it's going to affect his life forever. And so we go to all these different meetings and we talk about this, and we meet and we have these conversations, and we know what the problem are. You know, the elephant is in the room. We know it's there. We see it. We try to push around it. We walk around the elephant. We sit on the elephant. Nobody addresses the elephant in the room. And so here at the Men's Achievement Center, my goal is I sit down with the elephant, right? I talk to them. As you can see that picture, that's kind of like me in my office. I let them come in my office, just vent. And from the conversations that I'm having, that they're coming into rooms, they're coming into these classes unprepared, but they can do the college work. But if you look at the story of Tim, people taught him math, but his foundation wasn't there. So the foundations of math have been lost somewhere. I can remember being a kid taking my EOG, being so excited, but when I got to middle school and high school, that excitement was lost somewhere. And so for me, I look at this as I talk to the elephant every day. I have 160 guys in my program. And so I noticed that these young men start changing majors. I noticed that they were flunking out of school. And I was like, what is the problem? But it all stemmed from them having the head start when they go to math. And I'm not, like, again, I'm not saying the math department is bad. I'm just saying we have to address the problem of why is that the end all be all for these young men to be successful in their careers or in their life. I think there's a way, and we'll discuss later, how do we address this conversation? Because like I said, we're in meetings, but we never talk to the elephant. We talk about the elephant. When do we have these students in the rooms and understand how do we get this achievement gap for Black men? And we're not here waving the flag as Black men say, look at me, look at me. We know that Black men are smart. We know they can do the work. If a young man can play football and remember 250 plays with no problem, I know he can do math. And so what we have to do is find a way to connect the dots and put math at the forefront. If we're looking at a society that's going to be led by math, we have to get everybody involved. And so, like I said again, addressing the gap, we must talk to the elephant and not talk around the elephant. And so as I transition, as I talk to the elephant, I was studying and doing my dissertation. And I realized it's like, what are the theories that really work? And I looked at hundreds of theories. Like I said, I have 160 men in my program. And most of the time it came out was they were defeated, right? They were defeated when they came into the classroom, when they came into the campus, they already knew. Before I got to class, you know, that pessimism stepped in. You know, they already thought the worst of what was about to happen. They were defeated when they got into the classroom. And so the three theories that really stood out to me, and I started using these theories within my program, and one was validation, right? And so as you come into these math classes, even if I didn't know the math, if I get a faculty, a staff, a professor that validates me and say, young man, I see that you're struggling, but I'm gonna give you an opportunity. I need you to meet me after class, or I need you to go to tutor and show me that you're putting in the work and we'll get you through this course, right? You validated my feelings. You let me know that I'm capable of doing the work. I'm capable of learning, and validation won't allow the imposter syndrome to seep in because you validated me. You made me feel special. You made me understand that I'm just not a number. You know I'm struggling, but I want you to succeed. And so when I started using validation in my program, let these young men know, I know you're going to struggle. I know you're going to make mistakes, but I'm going to validate every feeling that you have. And so I noticed how my students, their attitudes, their moods would change. And then I went to the self-empowerment theory, right? And it's the behavior, the academic, you look at academic behavior, right? And we look at the social behavior centered around academics, right? And so we looked at the social empowerment theory. I gave these young men spaces to vent, talk about their struggles in class and open sessions, mentor each other, tutor each other, empower each other. And what I found out that once I gave them the empowerment to fail, but also pick themselves back up, I started seeing their trajectory change. And from there, I started seeing my GPAs go down. But once again, they still struggle with these math classes, but I empower them to at least go in the room and fight. Even if you don't pass, he'll say, Mr. Heath, I went to class every day. I gave my best. I put in the fight. And what can I say as a director of the program? If you told me you went to a room to fight and you still failed the class, I really can't put that all on you. If you come to my tutoring sessions, if you're meeting with the professor, you're sending emails and you're trying, and you empowered yourself to go there, even when you didn't feel validated and you still fought through it, I have to give you much kudos for that. And lastly, I looked at the being and eating psychological model, right? It looks at retention. It looks at the psychological ways that students withdraw from the education setting, right? And so what we did in these sessions, we would talk, we have these sessions are you're in the hot seat. And so we look deep into the relationship theory of what is your problem? What are the issues? What are your roadblocks? And I'm saying when I mix these three theories together, you'll see at the end of the presentation how my numbers are so high because I validate, I empower, and I look in the psychological aspect of what it takes. And so what I've learned is when these young men go into these math classes, they're already psychologically broken. But how do we fix that? I think it's by validating and empowering these students, letting them know you can make mistakes. And once we get there, you'll get away from the defeatism because I feel that these are the key aspects that keeps young men from graduating and crossing that threshold we know is graduation. And so I did more research and I said, let me dig a little bit deeper into this and see what the problem is. Once again, this session is not to harp on why Black men are not failing. We're not succeeding in math. It's about why they're not obtaining the information needed to be successful, right? And so I looked at, oftentimes in higher ed, we look at IQ, right? We look at your test scores, we look at your SAT scores, but we never stop and think about emotional intelligence, right? That EQ, right? So, when you look at intelligence, it measures the person's ability to be smart, right? It looks at the knowledge, the reasoning, the quantitative reasoning. When you look at EQ, it looks at the emotion, evaluating how people feel, controlling your own emotions, perceiving how others feel. So when I tapped into the emotional intelligence, I realized that these young men, they were smart, they could do the work, but they was emotionally tapped out. And so when I tapped into teaching them how to improve your emotional intelligence, articulate your feelings. When you're in class and the professor calls on you, you don't know the answer, express that emotion. Let him know, I don't know. But as my professor, could you stop and show me the steps that I'm missing? Don't sink when you don't know the question, or don't skip class because you have a test or you're scared to be called out. And so when these young men learn to attack their emotions, the IQ is already there. Once I said they're in college, we know they can do the work. So oftentimes we put so much emphasis on IQ that we never look at the EQ, which can be established within the math.
At this point, I think most of the work is happening in the front.
Hello, I think somebody's mute.
I can't say for sure. The thing is, they may juggle some stuff around in the back. I haven't seen that.
Somebody need to mute. Okay, and so research implies that to be successful, 80% of your life is determined on your emotional intelligence, and 20% is on the intellect. And so I think we're at the crossroads in 21st century. How do we keep measuring IQ when we never look at the EQ of these students? And so it's my goal with the Impact Project to help professors get emotionally attached and help these young men reach these platforms that I know they can reach. And so to be successful, we have to work as a unit and look at the bigger picture, right? And so as I gave you those three concepts, right? I want you to see what validation, psychological, and how you motivate students to be successful. And so once I tapped into this and young men learned, we saw a psychological safety that occurred as the young men transitioned through high school, through college. And this is my senior cohort, so I'll let you watch the video.
an organization. The African American Male Initiative have been just so vital to my academic success here at North Carolina Central University. And man, I just plan that other people get the same opportunities that this program gave me.
Man, listen, man, it's Deion Tremaine Brinson Jr. Remember the name.
Remember the
$1 Million Smile. $1 Million Man.
All right.
Came from nothing, turned my pain from the trenches into riches. You gotta remember this, man. Business administration major, concentration in human resources. We made it, 2021, baby. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today is something magnificent. With this pandemic going on, you know, black men have a double dose of not being accepted, wearing a mask, scared of being shot down. But we want to focus on the greatness of society and show you what today, when we put these gold blazers on, we show you the royalty, we show you the academic success, we show you that black men are excelling at high rates. And here at the Men's Achievement Center, we will continue to push that narrative. We will continue to show the world that everything is what you see. We're working out here. We putting in that work. These young brothers, they make mistakes, but guess what? We're going to stick with them the whole time, and we're going to make sure they make it to the finish line. So
Let's push through.
Push through. So, ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed is those three concepts coming together. As you see, I validated their presence. Psychologically, I had their mind for them to benefit and know that they could make it to the finish line. And when I put those three together, I saw how young men conquered every fear, how they came and jumped every hurdle it came. And so it brought me to the psychological safety aspect. And so if we're looking at how do we change the trajectory for math students, and especially black men, we have to have this psychological safety, meaning that I may have went to a rural school where the system or the education wasn't the best. I have some of the fundamentals, but I don't feel embarrassed or ashamed when I raise or I don't know the question. So when you create that space of safety, it improves their communication. And so once I taught these young men how, and in our space, you can be vulnerable, you can be at your worst. We're going to pick you back up. And I think as educators, our role is to produce those psychological safeties, and not that, oh, I am the such and such, I have a PhD in mathematical whatever, and you stand there with your chest poked out. That does nothing. That does nothing to improve the abilities of those students. They know your credentials. They see it. They call you Dr. Such and such. But when you can put your hat down and show them that you're human too, and we all make mistakes, I guarantee you that the trust levels, the humiliation will disappear, and students will make mistakes and still try. And so as we gauge these concepts together, this will bridge the gap to making us more successful and obtaining black males, and also helping them get through these math courses. And so when you look at the UNC system and this impact project, we've been meeting for the last 9 months. So it's like our COVID baby. We've been nurturing this thing. As soon as COVID hit, we met every Tuesday. Then we start building teams out. And so like the mission is not to leave anybody out. So the data doesn't lie. When I looked at all my data, I realized all my young men was failing math classes. And so when I spoke at one of the other UNC system conferences, Michelle heard what I was saying, and she called me, and we decided, let's see what we can do about this, because I looked at so many classes that they're failing, and I'm like, it's only math. How can we help this problem? So the issue is just to leverage, right? We want to identify, address the barriers to success, and minimize the course repeat rates, right? And like I showed you earlier, the young man failed 20 classes, so he has to repeat those 20 classes. That's a hill to climb and a half. And so when you look at this, I have to keep motivating him so he doesn't get tired and quit. And so lastly, we want to examine societal influences, the impacts. You think about it throughout COVID, it's been a stressful year for us all. You know, we've been sitting in the house, wearing masks, couldn't leave. The TV's been crazy. You know, society is going riots, all this kind of stuff. And then you're dealing with this, as this generation has dealt with seeing some things that we've never seen in our lifetime. And so we have to look at these influences and what are the outcomes, or what are what are we going to have in the next 10 years? What is going to be the outcome of this that we're witnessing in these last 2 years? And so I feel like as a system, like I said earlier, a system is something that works together. And so as a system, we have to work together to change the narrative. We can't have, oh, they're doing great over here at this university and this university is not doing the same. We're not a system. We're just a group of people up under umbrella. But if we want to be a system, we have to make sure everybody works together and everybody is succeeding. Because at the end of the day, this is a marriage between students, right? They're paying to get their education. They're paying to come a place. And so you think about it, tuition wasn't so high for certain people years ago, you know, so some people graduated with $500 of debt. You think about that now, students graduate with $120,000 worth of debt. And so this is a marriage. And so if we're going to charge these students for this, we have to find a way. And as educators, you should want to get down on the floor like you did when you was in kindergarten, cross your legs and really figure out how do we break this issue? How do we get to the root of this problem? And so if you're not really ready to get to the root of the problem, you're part of the problem. And so how do we change the narrative? How do we change our thought? How do you have empathy and not make it a black and white thing? Just make it a life thing. Just make it about the student's success. Because at the end of the day, when students fail, we all fail. And it trickles down to the economy. It trickles down everywhere. And so we just want to share the committee with you, the impact committee. Like I said, we started in March of 2020, and we've been working every 2 weeks to make sure this thing was pushed through. Then we recently started a subcommittee, right? And so the subcommittee is comprised of different people from the UNC system. And so we wanted to bring some other experts in that knew what they were doing. And so we're really in the process of making this thing work. I think once we get this ball rolling, you're going to see a change in the UNC system for African-American males, but also this will eventually trickle over to all students. And so we're not here to single out anybody. We know everybody needs help. And so, but the numbers don't lie. Data shows that our young men are failing. And for me, I'm going to do my best to make sure we can change that. And so that's my God-given talent and gift and my mission to improve the retention and success rate of males. And so as we look at this, you look at that picture, right? I feel like we're at this point when students come to college and the professors are like, what do I do? Why are these students not prepared? As a professor, that should motivate you to figure out, are we still using these commandments, right? Are we communicating? Are we providing representation, reasoning, argument, strategic thinking? Are we doing the commandments that math is made of and to get to the root of the problem? Are we frustrated and we just saying, you know what, he's not doing the work, F, flunk him, flunk her? There's commandments, there's rules, there's things that we have to keep in line in order to be successful. And I know it gets frustrating. And so if you look at our UNC system, we did have a K-12 a committee on there because I think it trickles down. When is the partnership between K and 12 and higher ed coming together? When do we sit at the table and see, what are you teaching? How can we help you so when your students come to college, they'll kind of be prepared and to do some of the things that we're doing. And so we won't have to get to the point where your head is on the desk and you're frustrated. And so, like I said, this is something that we all have to do. Just because we're in higher ed doesn't mean we don't need to reach back out to the K to 12. And so these are the commandments. These are the things that math says are the roots to getting concepts across to your students. And so ask yourself, as if you're a professor on here reading this, am I still holding the commandments of math, and am I still letting my guard down, being vulnerable and reaching students where they are? And so before I wrap up, I want to talk about some things that I've learned and I saw working. And so in my program, I started doing these personalized sessions with these students, right? And so we do a lot of flip class. I have an all male freshman class where we do freshman, acclimation and all this kind of stuff. So it's like a UNIB class. And so when I came around the personalized learning theory, I started using these things in my classroom, right? So everybody has their way of thinking it. I think we should do it this way. No, it looks like this. No, it works better if we do this. And so this picture dictates of how everybody sees the room different, right? And so Like I said, one man seen as a fan, the other seen as a snake. And that's all of us. We see the world different, and that's okay. But we have to change the model of how we see the world and look at it through somebody else's lens. And so for me, I sit back and I'll say, how can I get these young men to learn? And so I let them tell me their learning style, and then that's how I adapt my class. And so I have to make sure when I'm teaching for my visual learners that I have a lot of images. For my students who like to listen, I have to make sure I'm articulating that information to them, that I don't miss a learning style, right? And so we may have class outside, we may have projects, we do it all just to make sure that I inspire the students to learn and open up the floor for everybody. And I think if you look at the personalized learning model, this is something else that we could probably put into the math processes, into the classes, and change the math class. Like have math on the line. How do we visually give students a way to look at math from another aspect? And I'm challenging any faculty, staff, or who's on this call, think about your math classes. Are we just to the basics, standing on the board, this is how you do the problem? Are we really engaging? You got to think about it. This is the most engaged generation yet. You know, they always have music. They have access to phones 24/7. And so how do we engage them? And so for me, I use GroupMe apps. I throw problems in their GroupMe app. Sometimes we do class on the phone. I have them Googling YouTube and tell me what you find. And so that way I got them. They really holding their phone, which is a mind thing. So I'm holding my phone, but I'm also engaged in class. So I'm killing two birds with one stone, because you know that model, when we lose our phone, we don't know where it's at. But now you have your phone, so you don't have to text during class. I'm having you work on your phone. So as a professor, faculty, staff, I challenge you to look at this elephant and see, how do I look at this elephant from another view? And so I realized the story of Tim that I told you about, that story was a true story, right? And so recently, this story has been in the news right here. It talked about a professor who had to study with rats, right? And so he put the rat into the water, and just before the rat was about to drown, he saved the rat and pulled him out the water. Then about another 15 minutes, he put him back in the water, and he noticed that this rat would swim for another 60 hours because that hope experiment, right? We gave that rat hope, he knew that somebody was going to save him, or he knew that if I keep trying, that I can keep going. And so for me, when I read this, I said, wow, am I entangling this into my program without even knowing it? Because the thing is, my young men do have issues. They do get in trouble, some of them, but I still give them hope. And I save some of them. And when I save them and break it down to them, they keep going. They try harder. One, they don't want to let me down because I saved them from possibly losing housing, get kicked out of school, anything. So as we look at this UNC system, as we look at the impact project, I want this project to be a place of hope, realizing as soon as that young man is about to drown, we save them and we give them hope again to keep fighting. And so for me, this experiment is something that I'm gonna continue to do. I saved them right when they're about to drown. You can make it. Let's have this conversation. Let's go talk to this professor. How can we help this young man? And when that professor gives him a second chance, that's when he'll swim for another 60 hours. And so with this impact project, we're gonna be the hope. We're gonna be that savior. And when I say savior, I mean in like that project to really help these young men realize like there's something here. We know it. We're gonna try our best to give you the tangible items and skills that you need to be successful so you can swim for another 60 hours. And so, ladies and gentlemen, before I wrap up, I know I talk about math. I'm not a math expert, but I'm a people expert and I do my research. And so what you're looking at is a young man that wasn't the brightest in high school, elementary, but I was bright, I just didn't know. Meaning I was raised by two uneducated, hardworking grandparents, and all they knew was work, and all I knew. And so if I'm gonna be on the stage, I have to be transparent about my life, just to show you that someone gave me hope somewhere. And I looked at an experiment, like somebody gave me some hope somewhere, and that hope was North Carolina Central University. So at the age of 22, They allowed me to come back to college after I had flunked out and went through the community college route and did all those things. And so they gave me that hope. And I look back at it now, I was facing non-cognitive barriers and just mad at the world. But when Central gave me that hope, when they kicked me out my sophomore year and said, come back, we're gonna give you another chance. I've been swimming ever since. And so I'll say this today, if we want these young men to be successful, we know everybody's gonna make mistakes, but we have to find that place. We gotta give these young men hope. There's a lot of things socially and emotionally that we're dealing with. We're not asking for favoritism. We're just saying, have empathy, look at the world and see what's going on. And this quote by James Baldwin says, children have never been good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. And so if we want our next generation to be great, they're listening, but they're going to imitate what we show them. And so for me, I'm transparent. This picture up here was a young man who was lost, out of control. The young man is who I am today because somebody gave me hope. And I feel like if the Math Impacts Project, if the math conference, if the UNC system really wants to change, let's bring hope back to learning. Let's put the plaques down. Let's put the titles down. Let's get back to the nitty gritty of teaching and educating and allowing people to understand that where you come from doesn't determine where you're gonna go. As you see, I graduated with 1.9 GPA and now I'm Dr. Heath. And so anything can happen, anything can change. We all know that society, consequences, family structures, I call it the DNA lottery, right? I could have been born Michael Jordan's son, but I wasn't. I was born in a single parent home. Mom was addicted to drugs, but I still made it, right? And so never look at someone for what they've been through. So I don't judge students on what they learned in high school. How can I help them now? And so we're looking at math, we're talking about math, all the problems with math, but math has never been a problem for Black males. Historical point, look at Benjamin Banneker, Frank Cox, Mr. Woodard. These are some of the greatest mathematical minds in the world. So math is not far from us. We know we can do it, but somewhere the system was broke and these young men have fallen off the track. And so I leave you today to say that if we're gonna be great at what we do, we have to look at the consequences of the things that we do. And so put your fears around, have empathy, and have a conscience for yourself and judge the world for yourself. These students are our future. They help us pay our bills for some. I love these students. I get down with them on all levels. I build them up, I break them down. When they're broken, I build them up. So we have our ups and downs, that's okay. But today I wanna tell you, support this Math Impacts Project, because I think this is the future. This is the way that we can change the world in a mathematical-led society. And so these are my references. And I wanna thank you and just say that Tim has a story. Tim was me. If Tim can do it, I know these young men can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heath. That was fantastic and inspiring. You caught me off guard with the back end of it. The personal story definitely, it's motivational. I know you probably had it for motivating the students, but as an instructor and as someone working on this, I feel like, all right, I need to figure out what I'm going to do next to reach out and help the next student, help the next one to be you.
And I look at it, like I said, I'm an open book. I'm not scared to share my story. I know I wasn't the 4.0 and I wasn't a high school scholar, but it was there. I never tapped into it because I didn't know. So I'm just teaching young men, anybody I come in contact, let's not say young men, because we have young ladies who frequent my program as well, but it's untapped potential. And I see that math has been a issue. And I don't want to put math as the problem. It's just a foundational place. In math, if you miss a step, the whole problem is wrong. It's not like English. I can have a typo, you can still understand the paragraph. But when I mix a Y, X, so it's a wrap. And so I'm saying the foundational steps have been missed. And so let's just go back and fix the cracks. That's all I'm asking. And let's not blame the high schools. That's not it's what it is. We know what it is. And so, but I did pose a question.
Yes.
And, my question was, do we become a dream killer? Like, what do I do in those situations? I just want, because I'm still at I met with the student. I don't want to kill his dream, but I'm like, is this for you? But he says he wants to do this. He has a dream of doing that. So I'm gonna leave the floor open if anybody wanna, share that comment that they made. I see it's a few in there, but I don't want to kill his dream. So I told people, if I kill his dream, I have to replace it with another dream, right? And so if I say, so I had a young man that wanted to be in the NBA, but he never played high school basketball, never played college basketball. I said, you may not go to the league, but major in sports and become a sports agent and be a part of the game, right? So I think it's redirecting that dream is the word for it. But I'll leave the floor open if anybody want to chime in. I definitely want to hear some responses.
Yes, we do have a few minutes for questions or comments.
And just unmute yourself if you want to raise your hand. And
Dr. Heath.
Yes, sir.
I'm John Bosu, ANC. Sometimes you have to, the dream killer verbiage is a little bit strong for me, but I like to focus on assisting a student in pivoting. Because you may have a dream in this one particular role does not mean that you don't have skills that you can apply to other lanes. And sometimes these students are fixated and they're only looking down this one path and they ignore other options. So trying to get them to broaden their perspectives. And I find that in the corporate world, the ability to pivot is a great skill to have. So I just try to put that in my students early to make sure that, sometimes your dream might be a little bit detrimental to you down the road. So just take everything into consideration before you decide to put all your eggs in one basket.
And I think that's the hard part. He's like, and he's stubborn as a bull too, but I love him to death, but his mind is made up. And I'm looking like, how long do we go down this road? You can't flunk 5 more classes. But that was a good point. Reflect it. And I never want to kill the dreams, but I want to throw that out as an example of dream killers because they are out there. So good point. Anybody else? You let me know how many more minutes we have, Dr. Red. And, but if anybody else, just unmute yourself. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, these conversations are had every day in the space that I work in. And so, I know what I didn't show you guys. One more thing I want to show you guys. I'm sorry about that. Hold on. Did I? So this is what I wanted to show you as well, right? And so all of those things I talked about, those theories that I use, right? And I just want to show you that the numbers don't lie, right? Even in COVID, I went in. It's kind of like being at war. I had to mask up, and these students were on campus, and I really had to stay engaged. So we did have 120 office sign-ins, face-to-face. Like I was really in the trenches with these students. And so if you look over here, our GPAs for the spring, right? You look at, this is my cohort. So cohort 9 is our seniors. And so 12 is our freshmen. And so the strategies that I use with all these different theories that we use, psychological theory, you can look at the grades, right? And so they don't lie. And so not saying math is killing us, but it is. I feel like we could really do more. But, a 2.8, cumulative is a 2.8. Our active members who are 60%, I consider them who come to 6% of our stuff, study hall, I consider them active, right? And so we're like a 3.0. And so if I get my other students to that level, this cumulative of 2.8 could really grow. And so my graduating seniors in that video, average GPA was a 3.2 GPA. 3.2. Then you got a cohort 10, 2.7. Active members is 3.0. But I really want to stress the active member piece, right? It shows you when you put processes in, these young men follow these things, the grades and the numbers don't lie. When they're active and they're really following all the strategies that I use, they are the most successful students on campus. And I can guarantee you a lot of these numbers are not at other schools at the UNC system, or probably not between the men on our campus. This is not to brag, but I'm telling you the work that I put in. Through our group me, we had over 8,000 contacts from August until now. So I at least have
maybe 100 conversations a day in that grouping. And so just want to show you that the numbers and time, when I tell you guys we have to be engaged, I'm not just putting it on you. I do the same thing. I try to be engaged. And I also often get, cursed out by my wife because I'm too engaged, but that's just something that I have to do. But I'm gonna get off my soapbox because I could talk about this all day. Dr. Red, it's your show now. So
well, we do appreciate it. And I'm sure that more questions will pop in there. We've been copying over into the Jamboard. If you have additional questions for Dr. Heath, feel free to put them over there. If you put them in the chat, we'll try and get them migrated. But if you can have direct access to the Jamboard, that will work as well. Thank you again, Dr. Heath.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, no problem. We're going to move on in our program to try and keep everybody, keep us on schedule. The next session that we have scheduled is a community forum. So Dr. Elise Demeter is going to guide us through some of the disaggregated data from Math Pathways and the impact K-14 subcommittee chaired by Dr. Tamara Abaneri will host a lightning round. So I will turn this over to Dr. Demeter.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a wonderful session. Thank you so much for that keynote address. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Dr. Elise Demeter from UNC Charlotte. I've been working on Math Pathways for a couple of years now in two ways. One, I serve as an external evaluator for the great work that's going on at UNC Wilmington, Appalachian State, and Fayetteville State. So I'm very excited that all of those project teams have been presenting in this forum. Secondly, I have been using one of my superpowers for Math Pathways, which is to take big data and to make sense out of it. And so when we started this Math Pathways journey, the system office asked if I would do some baseline data reports, looking at math end of course grades across all institutions in the UNC system and breaking those end of course grades down by different subgroups. And so I'm going to circle back to that analysis today, what we call those baseline data reports, and dive a little bit deeper into them. So this is back in 2019, which I agree feels like a million years ago, but I provided all of the UNC system institutions with a report that summarized 3 academic years of end of course grades in our core math courses. So this is your college algebras, pre-calculus, calculus 1, quantitative reasoning, math for educators, these core courses in our math curriculum. And we looked at the DFW rates for different subgroups, for example. And I know a lot of institutions use those baseline data analyses as motivation for the work that they proposed in their original Math Pathways grants proposals, which was really exciting for me to see everybody make use of that. So this past fall, I updated those baseline data reports. So it's still the same time period, 2015 to 2018, which is a little while ago, but it's before we started doing this good Math Pathways work. It's also pre-COVID, and I think we all think our COVID grades have a little bit of an asterisk by them. So in some way, that's like a silver lining to go back a little bit in time. But I did some additional disaggregation of these data, and I looked at them by age. So I looked at adult learners 25 and older versus our younger, more traditional college age students. I looked at things by a full race ethnicity breakdown using IPEDS categories, as well as by a race and gender full breakdown. And so I'm going to show you that next. This analysis was over 200,000 students. So this is big data here that we're showing to see these patterns. And as Dr. Heath said, the numbers don't lie. So let's look at some of these patterns that we see. And what I'm showing you here is some opportunities to close some equity gaps. So I have a full race and gender breakdown here. We're showing the percent of end of course grades that are D's, F's, or W's in the math courses that we analyzed over this 3-year time period. We're showing these in percentages here on the y-axis, and I've got the IPEDS race and ethnicity categories across the x-axis. Women are in the gray bars on the left side of things, and men are in the blue bars. So what do we take home from this? All right, well, across the board, women tend to do better in college math than men. All the gray bars a little bit lower than all of the blue bars. We see that minoritized students tend to have higher DFW rates, higher percentages of DFW grades than their non-minoritized counterparts. And indeed, Black males had the highest DFW rate of any of the groups that I'm showing in this particular graph. And that data point is, of course, what's motivating the impact work, and that's the focus of that. But that's not to ignore that other minoritized groups are not also in this same boat and affected by similar issues. And so hopefully, by the focus of the impact work, we'll also have a global effect here where we're hoping to lower all of these bars. I would say they could all be lower, right? We want all students to be successful. When I presented these same data at a different Math Pathways event last fall, one of the participants then said in the discussion afterwards that their campus leaders didn't believe that they had equity issues on their campus. They didn't think it happened on their campus. So I'm going to disabuse you of that notion and be bold here and show you those gaps for each institution. And so these are, again, DFW rates. I have as a comparison point here, white men in this sort of dark gray bar and Black men in the gold bars. And I'm breaking this down now by each institution across the x-axis. And in every case, at every institution, we see the gold bars, the DFW rates are higher for Black men than they are for their white male peers. So I'd say this opportunity to close these equity gaps exists at each and every one of our UNC system institutions. And there's no one who can walk away and say, well, this is not a problem that we need to address. And I appreciated the tone from the keynote address of thinking of this not as indictments, but rather really as a call to action. So what can we do when we see those data and those data don't lie? All right, so I would suggest 4 things that we can do as part of our call to action and part of our mission to create more successful graduates. This is a photo from the 2021 spring graduation at UNC Charlotte, so that was exciting. So for one thing, really simple thing that we all can do is thinking about disaggregating our student learning outcome assessment data by different subgroups and different categories. We focused here on race and gender in the grades that DFW grades that I showed you. Other breakdowns are relevant as well. In the analyses that I did, you see similar equity gaps for, say, Pell students. Pell eligible students have about a 11% higher DFW rate than their non-Pell eligible peers. You also see equity gaps for adult learners, where adult learners tend to have higher DFW rates than traditional college age students. So a variety of ways you can slice and dice those data, but equity gaps exist along many lines. They don't exist, of course, in isolation. These issues intersect with one another. But by doing these data disaggregations, it helps us wrap our brains around where are the issues and how can we look at them, and how can we look at them a little bit more granularly so we can really track what's going on with these people and bring it down a level. And so when we're looking at our end of grades, and of course grades, or we're looking at outcome assessments from assignments in our courses, disaggregating down to different subgroups might tell you a slightly different story than when you're looking at people just as a whole. My second point here is adopt inclusive teaching techniques, which I think complements nicely all of the theories that Dr. Heath was talking about that his research and programs have been leveraging from a sort of student success point of view, and how can we kind of bring that into the classroom. So I would define inclusive teaching techniques as creating an intentional learning environment that makes learning equally accessible to all students, and where all students feel valued and supported. And I like to quote by Fayetteville State's math department chair, calls inclusive teaching, this is from Radoslav Nikolov, and he calls this an elastic definition. It can be stretched to fit many, many different kinds of work going on in the classroom. And so I think it will behoove us as a field to think really more intentionally about these concepts and to start articulating these constructs more specifically. What exactly am I doing in the classroom to be more inclusive? And in math, that might look like a variety of things. It could be using open source materials, for example, so that the cost of a textbook isn't something that is a prohibitive barrier to students and their learning. As we're all engaging in Math Pathways work and we have different interventions going on in our campuses, I think it's really important to think about how that intervention is not just affecting, say, DFW grades for everybody, but are we closing any equity gaps? So maybe looking at the whole, maybe the dial hasn't moved a lot, but when you break it down into subpopulations, maybe that's where you're making your difference. And if you're closing equity gaps, I think that's a good thing in that it shows that you are moving that dial in the right direction. And then finally, I have the point number 4 of have an impact. So I've loved the introduction today to the impact work. And I think that's another call to action of how can we all be involved and get involved in the impact work going on and bring that back to our classrooms, bring that back to our campuses, and think about how we intentionally engage on these issues. And I liked the analogy of thinking about the system as like a bicycle where each link needs to work together. So if we're all moving in the same directions, I'm hoping that in another few years' time, the system office will come knocking again and say, hey, we want to regenerate those data reports and look at all those math grades for all of the institutions once again. And that we'll see that we've made some differences and that those numbers will look qualitatively and quantitatively different from what I've showed you to date. So hopefully that will be the case. And that's all I have. I'm happy to take some questions on that. If people want to see their institutional reports with those baseline data further disaggregated, please reach out to Michelle, for example, and if she can't get you access, I have everybody's institutional report on hand and I can field that along as well. So if you need that, I'm welcome to provide it.
All right, so we have just a few moments for questions. Any questions that may pop up?
I have a quick question, Elise. When do you think it would be a good time to pull data again, considering the year we've all just had?
That's an excellent $1 million question. Yes. I mean, I think had COVID not hit us, we would be at that point now. Because I know the great work that has been going on everybody's campuses. I think we all feel like the pandemic rocked student learning in ways that we're still making sense of. And in some ways, I think some people would say students' grades have been worse, but then we have institutional policies like you can take a pass instead of failing, instead of a grade. And so there's been institutional level policies that have made the grades maybe a little bit less meaningful than they normally would be, or just changed what their meanings are from, say, especially for spring 2020. So I'm thinking if we roll out another year, like let's say we're back in person in the 2021, 2022, largely in person academic year. I think when we get that kind of under our books, we feel like the ground has stabilized under us. I think when we move forward then into that next cycle, say the 2022, 2023, I think that's got to be fair game. I mean, at some point we're going to have to say the world is what it is. We need to now deal with what we've got. But I think next academic year and getting into the year following is where that sweet spot will kind of show up.
So I might go ahead and put that request in now so that people can be planning for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we may have time for one more question, if anyone has one. No. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Demeter. I'm sure that our groups, as we're progressing, will be reaching out to you a lot more, especially this next group who is about to present. So I have inadvertently said that we were hearing from the K-14 group. It is not the K-14 group. We'll be hearing from the grants group, and Dr. Karen Singer-Freeman will be guiding us through their presentation.
So thank you. I just put a link to a Google Doc into the chat, and I hope everybody will join me in this doc. I've also shared my screen, and I want to confirm everybody can see it. I always feel nervous about that. So I'm working with a group of impact members from across multiple campuses to put a NSF I-use grant submission in July. And I loved our keynote from Dr. Heath and the wonderful data presented by Dr. Demeter, because I think it leads perfectly into how we're imagining this project. So I love the story of the wise men and the elephants that Dr. Heath started with. And I find that whenever I hear a presentation about certainly this topic and many topics, I feel like no matter where we're talking, it's the wrong part of the elephant because we're thinking about only one part of the elephant. And the truth is the elephant can't exist without all of his parts integrated. And so I think we're at this pivotal moment in the system where Math Pathways gave us great ideas and I think great commitment to improvement. But as the grants committee, subcommittee tried to think about what we do next, we felt like we didn't know yet which parts of the elephant were essential. And so if I had to use an analogy to what this grant is, we're hoping to do the work to find out, with a focus on African-American men, which of the many parts of the elephant are essential by doing a 3-phase, 3-year project. So phase 1 would be data collection, phase 2 would be data analysis, and phase 3 would be data discussions, we're calling it. And you can see on the screen here, the key research questions we want to answer, and we have many more sub-questions, but what experiences most effectively support the success of African-American men in required classes using mixed methods? So we're going to have a quantitative and qualitative threads, with the qualitative threads being surveys followed by focus groups, probably with 3 groups of African-American male students who succeeded on their required math class at their first go, students who got a DF or W in that class and then retook it and hopefully succeeded, and students who got a DF or W and switched math pathways or majors. And then we'll also probably be having focus groups with faculty and advisors and some other cohorts. And then the second primary research question is, why do these experiences facilitate the success for some African-American men? And that's going to be primarily those qualitative types of methods that we would use. And so to get this grant, which we don't expect to get our first go, we're hoping to get our second go, like every good NSF grant, we need to really think of every part of the elephant. And so I know that we have about 10 minutes with all of your collective wisdom. And what you can see in this table that I've shared are the grant subcommittees and a few distinguished guests' thoughts about what are all the factors that could affect the success of African-American men in our math classes. And so I know some people like to be talked through things, other people like to just dig in. So I encourage you, if you're a dig in person, I'm going to talk through this model or these variables just to explain what we're thinking. But please, without hesitation, just write things in here. You don't need to make them a suggestion. You don't need to make them another color. We won't be able to study all of these things, but we are hoping that by the end of this 15 minutes, we'll have at least be considering thinking about everything that might be involved. So we're thinking about 3 timeframes. If you think there's a 4th moment that we should think about, add a column in, but we're thinking we need to think about what happens before a class, during a class, and after a class. We're focusing on 4 classes: college algebra, pre-calculus, calculus, and introductory statistics or beginning statistics, whatever it's called at an institution. We opted not to study quantitative reasoning because that doesn't seem to be the focus of where African-American men are struggling. So then if we're thinking about before class, our input variables, the things that we think might matter, race and ethnicity, gender and age, generational status. So are you a 1st generation college student or a continuing generation college student? High school GPA, something about socioeconomic status. So high school zip code, K through 12 district budget. Then the method of placement. So through Math Pathways, we've tried a lot of different interesting ways to more effectively place students. The students' advising experience around their placement in the class. I see somebody added in student orientation messages such as look left, look right. That's a great addition. The math pathway they were placed in, their major identification, so which major they come in thinking they want, and their entrance pathway. their college GPA. So if it isn't their first semester, how were they doing previously? Their math placement score. So not just which class they place into, but what was the actual score? Whether the student was Pell eligible, has federal loans, the number of credits the students completed, and then institutional features. So for example, is the institution an HBCU? What's the size? What's the ranking? What sorts of supportive programs exist? Anything else you can think about, doesn't have to be pretty, just throw it in there, and we appreciate it. So then during the class, now we have input variables. So these are the things that we might put into, say, a hierarchical linear regression, or some sort of maybe analysis of variance, repeated and measures analysis of variance, looking at particular interventions. So those would be the course. And I mentioned already the 4 courses we're going to focus on. Whether the course uses adaptive learning and to what extent it uses adaptive learning, the percent of time in the class that's spent engaged in active learning, whether the course includes a required or optional co-requisite course, the method of delivery. So is it online, hybrid, in person? TA availability and TA policy. So is a TA required for the course? Is it present in all courses? The proportion of African-American men in the class, whether mathematics tutoring or mentoring is available, attached to the class, or required. Faculty characteristics. So what training did the faculty receive? What is the faculty's appointment? What's their experience teaching the class, and what's their mindset? So do they have faculty who have a growth mindset have been shown to have smaller equity gaps, meaning faculty who think that math abilities can develop over time tend to have smaller equity gaps. The class size, the student and structure ratio, the class structure. Oh, I think I have that twice. And the student's attendance in the class. So, and it could be other measures of participation we might put in there. We actually could put into attendance policy also, might be an interesting question. Input student variables, how many credits are they carrying that term? How much use have they, how much have they used supportive services? So for example, if there's an adaptive learning platform, how many hours did they spend in that platform? How much did they go to tutoring office hours, things like that. I see somebody added extracurriculars, time allocation, thank you. And then in terms of output dependent variables, we're thinking quantitative and qualitative. So we had an interesting discussion yesterday about the idea that maybe we want change scores. So that could be something like change pre-test, post-test ALEX scores. Maybe there's some better measure people can think about that would be a pre-test, post-test measure. And the idea here is, and this is really an interesting question, are we interested in how much African-American men learn in the class, or are we more interested in what influences whether they pass the class? Because those are 2 different questions, and maybe we're interested in both. So a change score is going to get at how much do they learn over baseline. And so that might lead us to say a class is successful, even if a student got a D, if the student showed substantial learning across the class. So their final grade, DFW rates for the class. And then qualitative dependent variables, the student's sense of belonging, their sense of academic self-efficacy, or perhaps math self-efficacy, their math mindset. I think somebody added in goal orientation, and if you added that in, if you maybe add a little explanation, that would be helpful to me, and any other variables you think here. And then finally, after class, and this, this is a little bit of our dream. One of our team members already wrote in, are we really sure we can do this? And I don't know. But one of the things that's come up in our discussions is, okay, so we want to get more students to be passing their required math classes, but what happens next? So if a student passes a required math class, say with a C-, is that enough to make them say, well, I'm never going to be a doctor with a C-, and so I'm going to switch out of my STEM major into some other major? Or if a student doesn't pass a required math class, what are the things that influence whether they retake that class? Or as Dr. Heath said, have their dreams crushed, and decide they're going to switch pathways. And so there we thought formal advising, peer advising experiences might be input variables. And the peer advising was this issue that people on our committee thought sometimes students are getting the most important advising from their friends or their family. And so that we need to start looking at that as well. And then the quantitative dependent variables, changes to major or pathway, retaking a required math class, and grades in future math classes. Actually, that's another outcome I should have mentioned. You know, when we were making our vision statement, we thought about actually encouraging African-American men to pursue math-related majors. And so if we do it all right, and an African-American man has a transformatively good math experience, might they actually switch towards a more math-intensive major or track? And then their qualitative feelings. So the student's sense of mathematical self-efficacy, their interest in taking future math classes, and their confidence in using the materials learned in class outside of future classes. So I know I've talked through all of that. I see people have been writing things in. We have 2 minutes left, and I'm happy to take any questions. If anybody wants to join the grant subcommittee, we have a very heavy lift between now and early July when this grant is due. So please do email me and I will immediately add you to our group. We meet Tuesdays at 1 o'clock. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Karen, we are just so grateful that you have this level of organization and have put all this thought, you and the rest of the grants committee have put all this thought into this project.
It has been truly a team effort. And so, you know, all the members of the grant subcommittee deserve a major shout out, and all of the people that we've just attached to us through brazen requests like the one I just made.
I will make sure that names are applauded. Is there a date that you need to have input by? Is it today?
Pretty much really soon. We are working out, you know, obviously pivotal to the proposal is going to be the research design. And so we had a meeting yesterday, beginning to try and hammer out the research design, and we're probably going to try and finalize it next Tuesday.
The Jamboard, it says, is there a category for half generation, first gen on one side and not first on the other?
First gen on one side and not on the other. So we're thinking about that as an input variable. So something, and you know, I guess it matters during the class. In some ways, maybe those individual variables should be moved to during the class. Ooh, what just happened? I think somebody just erased the whole document. Oh no, there it is. So I'm not sure if that's the question, but I think maybe all of these things really belong here.
And Dr. Red, how are we doing on time?
So we're say a moment over. Or a minute over. So if there aren't any additional questions, and if you do have additional questions or comments, please feel free to use the Jamboard once again, because we would like to, we need like to crowdsource as much input as we can to help guide this grant effort. So definitely give us your feedback over there. To try and keep us on schedule, we will move on to our next presentation, which, if my now updated copy is correct, should be Dr. Kelly, who will be giving us a presentation on the North Carolina A&T QE Quality Enhancement Plan for their SACS reaccreditation. So, Dr. Kelly, please take it away.
Indeed. I want to start by asking same question though. Can everybody see my screen? All right, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we're doing at A&T today. So for those of you who have been spared having to go through the accreditation process, those of us who are at institutions that are accredited by SACS have to come up with a quality enhancement plan once every 10 years. And in your quality enhancement plan, your QEP, you develop it by looking across the last 5 years of your institutional data, figuring out what the biggest bottleneck towards student success, student performance is, and then you make a plan for how you're going to spend the next 5 years fixing it. So our next QEP cycle begins this fall, in which we're going to roll out a new quality enhancement plan to address general education mathematics. In our overview of institutional data, we found that we had a 33% DFW rate in Gen Ed math, which is quite a bit higher than any of our other DFW rates by cluster on campus. Now, for the last 5 years looking at our Gen Ed math, we were looking at courses that were combination algebra and pre-calculus courses, trigonometry courses, calculus courses. Thanks to the great work that Dr. Red and the Math Pathways team is going, we're going to have a much wider variety of general education math courses in the future. But right now, the data that we were able to look at looks at courses like that. Then each of our majors need to take at least 2 of these courses. And the math department serves about 2,800 students per semester in just these courses alone. So that's a huge obligation for that department. So when we're looking back across the last 5 years of data, we had over 12,000 data points from our institutional data that looked at retention, progression, and demographic information compared to Gen Ed math, progression across all quantitative courses in students' majors, because it is a STEM institution, how gapping, if you took a semester or 2 off between courses, affects someone's performance. We also had great data shared with us by Math Pathways, so we could see how we're comparing to the rest of this institution in the system. And we had some nice focus group data that our Center for Academic Excellence provided from math faculty who teach these Gen Ed courses, as well as students in these courses. So Dr. Red and I actually worked together and spent many months going through all this data. We really, really dug deep and we tried to find every pattern that existed. Well, here's what we found. Number 1, students who show up to class regularly pass, and those who don't show up regularly don't pass. I know you're all shocked to hear this. Secondly, we found that the general education math performance followed our students throughout their entire careers. Because again, it's a STEM institution, and every time a student took a course in which a Gen Ed math course was a prerequisite, 25% of the variance in their performance was explained just by how they did in that class. So doing well in math is important. But what was really interesting were these last 2 items, which were that students who failed the first Gen Ed math class on the first attempt almost always failed the second course on the first attempt. And students who passed the first course on the first attempt passed the second course on the first attempt. Now, this isn't really surprising unless you think about all the things that are not said here, because these 2 pieces of information were true regardless of all student demographic variables, regardless of all instructor variables, and regardless of all classroom variables. So it did not matter if the student took one class as a traditional face-to-face lecture, online, hybrid, flipped classroom, scale-up group-based learning, Emporium-style module learning. It didn't matter if they switched instructors. It didn't matter what their individual demographics were, regardless of all things that happened to them and all things that they brought with them. So the students who were going to pass regardless, and the students who were going to fail seemed to fail regardless. And so what we were able to conclude from all this data is we still didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what was attributing to this high DFW rate. So we had to do some more digging and another data collection. So when we dove into the math education literature, we found a wealth of knowledge about all these different variables that are classroom-based or instructor-based or student-based that ultimately affect student performance in math. And so in the spring of 2019, we put together a huge questionnaire and we surveyed all of our students in Gen Ed math. And 396 of our students completed the entire questionnaire and did so very thoughtfully. You know, they didn't just mark 5 straight down on every page. And we found something really, really interesting in terms of their goal orientation. So goal orientation is this variable that deals with the student's mindset. When they enter the classroom, is their goal to really learn and master the material, or is their goal to get through the class as quickly and painlessly as possible and put it behind them? If students who have high goal orientation, then they want to learn the material. And if they have low goal orientation, they're just trying to put this thing behind them. And what we found is that, again, with no demographic variable that predicted this, across all majors, our students had low goal orientation. In fact, our engineering majors, for example, found themselves no more in need of learning math and no more likely to need to use math in their future than our dance majors. There just wasn't that understanding that math was important. And even more concerningly, if you look across all this literature that we use to put together a questionnaire, it consistently shows that if instructors do all these good things, then students will have higher goal orientation. And if instructors do these bad things, students will have low goal orientation. When you assess these students' psychological response to all these instructor behaviors compared to goal orientation, the literature predicts that there should be a correlation that's moderate and positive. What we found across our data was a correlation of negative 0.02.
No.
And what does this mean? It meant that there was no song and dance routine that our instructors were able to do, no matter how great they weren't affecting our students' goal orientation whatsoever. And that's really important because it says that this issue with goal orientation we have on our campus isn't something that can be affected in the math classroom. It can't be fixed there, because if it was, the data shows that our professors were already doing all the things that should be fixing the goal orientation issue. So for our QAP, we realized that we need to get more students to attend class, of course, but we've got to really focus on and fix goal orientation. And that is something that is only going to happen if we all work together and create a cultural change at the institution. So that can't just happen in the math class. So the campus came up with 5 clusters of initiatives that we're going to start rolling out this fall that we hope will enhance attendance and enhance goal orientation. The first of these are faculty and advisor enhancement initiatives. First, we're creating a group of math faculty fellows positions, and these positions will allow for some research funding and course release time for any math faculty who are interested in doing some pedagogical research on enhancing goal orientation in their own courses. Second, our Center for Teaching Excellence Director is going to come around to all of the colleges and then work with new faculty orientation moving forward to teach us how to talk about math. We found that often faculty accidentally demotivated students to learn math. For example, if a student comes to me and they're stressed about their grade and I say, you only need a C. You only need a C. It's going to be okay. Well, if they only need a C, I might be saying that to make my student feel better, but that really says that the math isn't that important. So there are different ways we can talk about math while still building rapport and encouraging our students. Third, we're going to start recording unexcused absences with failing final grades. That way, as advisors, we can have more nuanced conversation to talk about, what about if I see you had perfect attendance, what about this course setup didn't work for you? Where can we place you better to be successful? Or why didn't you show up to class often? Those are very different conversations. In terms of student support, we're going to station some TAs in the library where students do a lot of their homework in the evenings. We're also going to embed peer tutors into each of our academic colleges. And these tutors are going to be specially trained such that when the student shows up and says, hey, I need help with related rates, before actually beginning helping students with the math material, these peer tutors are going to be able to pull out the curriculum guides for that student's major and point to the courses in their major in which they're going to be using that material later. So to reinforce the importance of learning this type of math. Third, we're going to have some curricular initiatives. Our freshman studies courses taught from our Center of Academic Excellence are going to have a day where they talk about the importance of math for life or math in majors later on. Second, we're going to develop some unique half-semester courses. We know that students come to college and sometimes they just have a hard time transitioning. It takes them a couple of weeks to get themselves together. So these half-semester courses are not going to be courses students can register for themselves, but rather those who start off rough with the recommendation of both their advisor and their math professor who believe that the student is capable of doing well and has gotten over their growing pains early in the semester, they can be pulled out of their current class they're not doing well in and restart the class at midterm, taking it at double speed. So they don't have to wait to the next semester to start over. We're also going to develop a repository of videos on the relevance of math for life and for careers that could be used in advising and freshman study courses. We're also going to look at the way our extracurricular activities are offered. Currently, they're offered at the same time that our class grid exists. And so we are giving students these subliminal messages constantly that say, hey, this thing that is for professional development may be more important than going to class. And we're going to end that. So the idea with our changes in extracurriculars is focusing on changing the grid, changing how and when these extracurriculars are offered so students don't have to choose between going to them and going to class in the future. And finally, we're going to do some campus education. There's a module now that exists that walks students through the intellectual and financial cost of skipping class, and that's going to be made available to advisors. And also our QAP coordinator is going to be keeping campus educated every semester as we do our formative and summative assessments so that we know what we learned and what we may need to do better to help affect attendance and goal orientation. So that is our plan. And if there's any conversation, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Right, so we'll open it to the floor and also the Jamboard. On slide 10 of the Jamboard, if you want to post questions, if we're unable to get to it, please feel free to post them over there as well.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I find this fascinating, and I'm really hoping that this makes a nice dent in what you're doing. The half semester courses, did I understand that those are for students, if you're enrolled in class A but not doing well, you start over in that same class? It's not a fallback class to a prerequisite course. You fall back into the same class and start over again. Is that what I understood it to be?
That's exactly right. Yes.
That's I haven't heard people discussing that before, so that's an interesting thought to me.
So this is something that came from our Student Government Association. Something I was not aware of before starting through this process is that apparently a lot of our North Carolina public schools, in fact, the majority of them, have moved to a no-fail system, which means that as students are physically present on the day an assignment is due, they are automatically allotted 50% of the credit, be it an exam, homework assignment, whatever. So a lot of our good students in high school never did homework because they understood the material. It wasn't going to affect their grade, so they never did it. Well, a lot of them show up here not expecting, having never seen how a 0 affects their grade. So the idea here is that for those students who were actually perfectly capable, but just had some hard time adjusting to college, they're going to be able to restart and finish the semester with the same number of courses they set out to. So we're anxious to see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm anxious to hear how it goes. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
How is the planning for those half semester courses going to work in terms of like teacher workload and things?
That's a really good question. My understanding at this moment is that there will be one section of each course, each of those gen ed courses set out that will have a half semester course, and that's going to be part of faculty's planned teaching load. But those courses will not be populated until about the 7th week of class. At that point in time, students across all of the sections are going to have the opportunity, working with their advisor and professor, to move into those courses. One of the things that we want to make sure doesn't happen is that students who don't have the discipline or the background in math to do an entire semester of college math at double pace, we don't want them to put in that class and set them up to fail.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question. And this is a question I'm curious myself. Do you think, every university or HBCU has a particular pocket of population that heavy populates their school, like a district? Do you think there's a conversation that needs to be had with that district as maybe a pilot to see how their students are taught and learned in those math classes compared to other students, to see if we work hand to hand with certain districts or with the K-12, we can improve these processes on the lower end. So once they get to college, it's kind of like we build this partnership because we need those students to continue the process of college, right? And so I guess my question is, do you think there's room to work with but your most active district that attend, where you recruit the most students? And do you feel like that could help with your plan?
I
know that's-
absolutely do. Yeah. So Dr. Jason Caldwell, who is a faculty member in management, has started a relationship this summer with Dudley High School, which is one of our big feeder schools, to do exactly that. And the reason it came out of management is because business was, of all of the of all of our students, business was lowest in thinking that they were going to need math in their future. And so business is really looking hard into why is this happening? If you come into college and you want to be a finance major, you should expect there would be numbers in your future. And so this is step one in looking into that, and we're really hopeful.
All right, I'd like to hear about that later. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, well, if there are any additional questions, again, please feel free to use the Jamboard and we'll make sure that they get shared with Dr. Kelly. There's just so much that came out of her work that I thought was just interesting and maybe not surprising, but I think that it's going to be a lot of work is going to come out of this. A lot of information and a lot of work to do is going to come out of this well after our QED cycle. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Kelly. We have a quick break scheduled right now, so I want to make sure everyone has a moment to do that. Grab a bite to eat, restroom, whatever you need to do. And we will reconvene at 10:45, so in about 15 minutes with our next presentation. So I'll see everybody in a few. Right. So, is the team from Fayetteville State here? Is everybody here? You guys ready to roll?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we're gonna go ahead and get back started to try and stay on time. And our next presentation, session 7, is going to be from our team at Fayetteville State, who's going to discuss the redesign strategies that they used in their quantitative reasoning course.
Can I get the co-host so I can share my screen, please?
Sure thing.
All right, thank you. Good morning to everyone. My name is Perry Gillespie, and I am the coordinator of our quantitative reasoning course. I am going to be one of the presenters, and the title of our presentation is Designing Math Pathways on Certain Redesign Strategies for a Quantitative Reasoning Course. And as you well see, there are a lot of people that was involved in this, and we will talk about the importance of this collaboration as we go through our presentation. We will cover the introduction. We'll talk about the course projects and adaptive remediation component, the inclusive teaching pedagogy, as well as some acknowledgements. The goal of this session is to share strategies and tools integrated in the redesign of the course, which we are calling Math 126, which is our quantitative reasoning. And this particular course is geared to students majoring in the arts, humanity, social sciences, as well as the nursing. The redesign was supported by the Improving Mathematics Pathways at FSU, funded by the UNC Math Pathway Implementation Grant. Now, I want to give a little backdrop, a little background information, and which is very familiar to probably all of us, so I will probably be singing to the choir, but just to give us a little foundation. We at FSU actually have two branches, one dealing with the STEM majors and another one dealing with non-STEM majors. And with our STEM majors, the introductory course or the general education course is going to be pre-calculus 1, where with the non-STEM majors, it is the college algebra. But if we go and look at the material that both of these courses are actually covering, the pre-calculus, which is our STEM majors, covers 7 chapters, where the non-STEM majors actually covers 5 chapters. However, the chapters in the college algebra, the 5 chapters in the college algebra are exactly the same chapters, the same problems that are in the pre-calculus. So we end up teaching a non-STEM major just same exact way we teach a STEM major. Now, let's look at the average non-STEM major. The average non-STEM major, as it was alluded to by Dr. Kelly in our last presentation, these are the individuals that will come and ask you in the very beginning of the class, what do I need just to get a C out the course? Or they are believing that they have math phobias and this, that, and the other. So we had to be a little bit more creative in actually addressing these individuals. So this is the reason for this Math 126 being birthed. So our course at FSU for Math 126 is a 4-hour course, and that means we have 3 lecture hours with a 2-hour lab per week. This will actually satisfy the core curriculum, the quantitative reasoning skill component. And we actually offered our first course. This course was first offered in fall of 2013. And as you see the chart at the very bottom of my slide,
you notice we started out with an enrollment of 43, and then all of a sudden it kind of went down and tanked. In one academic year, 2016 to 2017, there was no one that enrolled into the course. And then all of a sudden we started gaining momentum. And now we're up to, from our last academic year, of 524 students enrolled in this course. How did we actually achieve that? And I'm going to kind of just give you a couple of strategies to help enrollment. And one of them is we actually had a workshop for our academic advisors, those individuals that are responsible for our first-time freshmen making out their schedule. We needed to let them know that this course here is a better suit for these non-STEM majors that are coming in. This college algebra is, let us try to work this Math 126. So if you know that they are in the arts or in the humanities, social sciences, as well as nursing, please enroll them into this course. We also had to have a good buy-in with our chairs of the other disciplines. And last but not least, and this here, I believe is the most important, we had to break the tradition, and that is to reduce the course offerings of college algebra. And at FSU, what we plan on do is actually trying to phase out that course. So this is how we can actually phase out college algebra. So this is how our enrollment has actually increased. Now I would like to talk about the course projects. And before I get into it, I want to bring up this age-old question, and I have been teaching for a minute, and a lot of our non-STEM majors always have this question: when will I ever use this stuff? Why do I have to go through this class? What is the purpose of this class? And these course projects helps address that question. So again, I want to bring this fact up that in our department, the math department, most of our faculty, if not all of our faculty, have taught Math 126. And that means we had to buy in. And that is very important. If we don't have a strong buy-in, then there's going to be resistance and we may not have meet success. After the buy-in of our math faculty, we went out and solicit help from the other programs. And you can actually see this on our chart. And this big group in fall of 2019 came together. And one thing that we needed to do was actually revise our student learning outcomes. So what we did, we took the student learning outcomes from our college algebra course, and we had to sit down and make some revisions. So those student learning outcomes that are actually stated in our syllabus for the college algebra had to be tweaked so we can address the needs for our quantitative reasoning course. So we had several meetings on that. And next, which is another thing with the collaboration, there was a math faculty and a collaborator from one of the other programs that actually paired together, and we had a two-person team, and they were responsible for coming up with projects for that particular discipline. And as I continue to talk, I will actually go through some of the slides so you can see the various projects that we actually came up with. I believe this was a good collaboration because when we are dealing with mathematics, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we believe that everything in math students need to know, but that's not really realistic. And talking to that representative from that other department gave us a little bit more insight on the topics and the skills that each discipline needed to know. So if we are servicing your student, we need to make sure that that particular skill is something that they are able to actually master as they matriculate to throughout their academic career. Now, outside of the student learning outcome revisement, we had the faculty of each department, math faculty, along with the representative from the other program, model, paired together, coming up with these projects. I believe the projects went very, very well, and you will see some remarks at the very end. These projects are actually assigned during the second half of the semester. And reason being is because the first half, we will talk about that later on, but the second half is there because a lot of the skills that is needed will be addressed in the first half of the semester. So when they actually see the projects, they are able to apply the knowledge that they actually learned within the classroom. And we have seen a lot of positive feedback, a lot of positive feedback, and from not just the students, but also the faculty members. 2 to 3 projects are actually assigned to each of our students. The students can actually pair together and work, or they can do the projects by themselves. And it's all up to them, but they have to turn in their own projects. And that is the most important piece. And just going to go through the last 2 projects just to give you an idea of what they are actually needed to do. Now, some of these projects, if not most of them, dealt with Excel. So they had an Excel component that they needed to use, but then there was others that a scientific calculator was enough for them to actually complete these projects. And as I go to my last project, and again, just to give y'all just a quick idea of what type of projects we came up with, I believe is very important. And we need to make sure we could continue to keep that open communication from department to department, just in case something changed within some of the other programs. They need to be able to communicate it to us so we can kind of tweak some of these projects that we actually have here. And this last slide that I have here is the remarks from the projects, faculty, as well as remarks from our students. And at this point in time, I'm going to transition and turn it into the hands of Dr. Wu Jing.
Hello, everyone. When Dr. Previous slide, please. Yes. When Dr. Codpilli worked with faculty in School of Business for the project, they say that their students need the knowledge in both quantitative reasoning and algebra. Therefore, in order to meet their need, Dr. Codpilli began to create a new qualitative reasoning course for business in spring 2020. Here is the textbook for this new course. The reason why we chose this book is, on one side, it covers all the contents we need. On the other side, there are many real-world application examples and problems for every section, especially applications from business and economics. This new course was piloted by Dr. Tan and me last fall, and by myself this spring semester. Meanwhile, we created 4 projects that focus on business real-life application. Here is one example of the project which focus on the interest of mortgage. This course will have an official name, Math 128, Quantitative Reasoning for Business, Stage 4. By the way, Dr. Ailey and Dr. Smith-Burton from College of Education also created a new quantitative reasoning course for education major. We call it Math 127. Therefore, all non-STEM majors are covered by those 3 quantitative reasoning courses. Now I yield the floor to Dr. Wang.
Good morning. I'll talk about adaptive remedial component in Math 126 at FSU. To make sure that students are mathematically well prepared and a success, a 4 to 8 week remedial session is implemented for Math 126. Here is a strategy we adopted. During the first week of Math 126 class, students are given a carefully designed comprehensive pre-assessment. The pre-assessment covers the basic knowledge that the students need for success in Math 126. After the pre-assessment, students are given 7 worksheet problems to solve in remedial sessions in labs. The worksheet problems cover the basic topics including fractions, ratios, rates, decimal, percent, algebraic expressions, adding and subtracting real numbers, solving linear equations, exponents, and polynomials, roots and radicals. In the end of the remedial sessions, students are given a post-assessment. The questions in the post-assessment are similar to that of the pre-assessment. Here is the adapted remedial component in Math 126 at FSU. Next, Dr. Bila will present inclusive teaching pedagogy.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to share with you some strategies I have applied in my face-to-face classes. The inclusive teaching pedagogy is centered on transforming the classroom in a student-centered learning environment. While teaching, the instructor needs to connect to students and meet them at the mathematical level where they are at the beginning of the course. Imagine yourself as being the swimming coach, and you teach your students how to swim. Some of them will be afraid of water, while others will take the lead. It is very important for the instructor to understand that each student is different, and so they are their learning styles. Students come from different backgrounds, and they have different mathematical knowledge. Next slide. Thank you. The inclusive teaching pedagogy requires the instructor to provide a clear outline of the course requirements. And here we need to have in mind that not all students know the expectations of a mathematics course taught at college level. The second requirement for the instructor is to engage each student in classroom discussions. Next slide. Thank you. So my priority was to design class assignments that would allow me to discuss with each student, each class period. And that was the key of changing the class dynamics. I have decided to use 2 sets of class handouts, one for the theory and one with problems. I call the second one the quiz. So I decided to quiz them each class period, to collect their work at the end of each class, to review their work, to add consistent feedback to their work, and to return the handouts at the beginning of the next class period. The quiz was not graded. It was intended to increase my interactions with students and to increase the interactions of students among themselves. Students became responsible on how they spent their time during the class period. They had to solve problems in class, in small groups, and to turn in their work at the end of each class. The students who would not collaborate will be marked as absent. Practically, they needed to come to class and to study and not look at me how I teach. I would also make time to go around the class, talk to each student, and help them with their questions. Even if the problems were a multiple choice, the students needed to show their work to receive credit. Before the test, I encouraged them to have chapter summaries written by themselves. Some of them didn't know how to do this task, so I had to explain to them in detail. I would provide study guides and practice tests with similar problems to those solved in the previous classes. In the same time, I would pay attention to their feedback and use it to reflect on the class dynamics and to accommodate their speed of learning. Their feedback was very important to me. Next slide. Thank you. After a few classes, each student knew what to expect from my course, and some of them would look forward for my feedback. Students felt connected with their peers, they felt connected with me, and they felt like their learning needs were met. I also emphasized to them the importance of staying organized and keep the handouts, quizzes, and tests in a folder, and have only one notebook for the lab. The feedback at the end of the course was very positive, and also the results. In summary, there are many ways in which we can change the class dynamics to better connect with our students. Therefore, I would recommend this method to any instructor who teaches a lower level course. Thank you.
In conclusion, what I would like to do is actually just give a couple of takeaways just to reemphasize. One is collaboration. It is very important that we deal with our collaboration, not just within the math department, but across disciplines. It is very important. And also the enrollment. If we are trying to help our non-STEM majors, it is imperative that we actually get them in the seats. And if we are planning on doing this redesign, their tradition has to break. So as I stated earlier on, one of the key components is reduce the offerings of the college algebra course. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. So we have just a few minutes for questions. So there are a few in our Jamboard, but I figured we would start with if there are any questions from the floor directly, we can start there. There don't seem to be any, so let's go over to the Jamboard. But please jump in whenever you have a question. I'll just start over here. So one question was, how is the adaptation managed? Is there an associated technology? I think you made a comment about adaptive lessons. So how are you guys managing that?
I can allow Dr. Wang.
Okay. For this adaptive remedial components, actually, on our teaching experience, we found that actually most of the students enrolled in Math 126 are not well prepared, underprepared. So sometimes we assume that, okay, student, you should know this, you should know that. But the reality is they need help. So based on this, we create this adapted remedial session. Okay, so actually this is a we gather together from the idea of the each faculty that teach Math 126 or previously that is our college algebra. Okay, so from the feedback of the faculty members, they say, okay, students they need to build a solid foundation or have the prerequisites for these topics that to make sure that the student success in this class. So that's why we give them the pre-test cover all those topics that are needed for the success of Math 126. And then after the pre-test, we followed the 7 worksheet, 7 remedial sessions. And each remedial session, we give cover a certain topic. Each remedial session worksheet problems, like it had 20 questions. So what we do is in the lab, we give the students before the COVID-19 face-to-face in the lab, we print it out and give the students, they solve this problem in the lab. And we have, they solve the group, they have the peer help and also instructors in the lab. We have a learning assistant also help the students. So we found that in this way, so after these 7 remedial session that most students get improved for the prerequisite. So this is from the result of the poster test, we can see that. And we are still analyzing the result. Hopefully later we'll give the more helpful result and help us to improve these adaptive assessment worksheet sessions.
Also, just wanted to kind of add to what he was saying. We actually, of course, this was pre-COVID, so we wanted them to be in the lab so we can physically see what they were actually writing. So we had it that we gave them a paper to actually write out and show the work. This was after the pre-test that they actually took. And by the scores of the pre-test, we gave them the worksheets and they were required to show work. But because of the COVID situation, we had to kind of make some adjustment and actually put it online. We also wanted to mention that we do use Math Excel in lieu of some of the technology and the lack of face-to-face stuff that we actually that we cannot have that face-to-face, and the lack of trying to be germ-free, so not having a bunch of paper floating around and just utilizing the technology. And one of my colleagues also wanted me to bring in that the projects, and I also mentioned that a lot of them dealt with the Excel, Microsoft Excel.
So we have probably time for one more question. Don, I see your hand raised. You're muted.
I want to applaud you for getting, so many faculty, in your department and also outside the department involved. And my question is basically, how did you go about doing that? That sounds like a very difficult thing to do.
Well, there's an old proverb that says, money answers all things. So we initially coming with the developing the projects, getting the faculty together. There was a stipend through the implementation grant. So that kind of gave us that carrot to kind of get together. And really, once we got together, and I think that is, Dan, that's a very good question. Just initially getting the meeting started. Once we got started, I think the ball started rolling, and we've seen a lot of positive feedback, but it's just initially saying, I really don't want to do this. I don't see things going to even change, because for some of us, if we've been in this thing for a while, we've seen this TV show. And a lot of times it's just a bunch of talk. We make a couple of changes, but then we revert back to doing the same thing that we used to do. And our chair is making a strong argument in reducing the course of college algebra. So if there are no college algebra courses offered, students are really, quote unquote, forced to actually take 126. So that's really your motivational factor.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, so if you guys have any additional questions or comments for this team, please be sure to use the Jamboard, and we'll make sure to get those comments out to, or the questions out to the team. If you want to leave contact information in there as well, then we can make sure that the team's able to get back directly to you. But we'll certainly synthesize all of that in our work. So that brings us to our last presentation, and I believe we're still doing the photo at the end, so don't disappear right at the end of that presentation. We try and do a quick group picture for our workshop, for our retreat, our summit. There you go. But we have our last group, which is the placement group. And let's see, I'll be sharing my screen for that one. Let's see. If I can, there we go. Let's try that. Just give me 1 second. Trying to multitask. There we go. Does everybody see, hopefully, the presentation and not all of the other junk that's on my screen? Okay, so this is from our placement group with Impact, and we're calling it the Math Placement Tsunami. It's kind of like the perfect storm that has created itself and impacted 2020. And now we're all getting ready for 21-22, and we really don't know what to expect right now. So particularly when it comes to placement, because of all of the different ways that different systems and different institutions and schools have dealt with it. So that's what this presentation will be about. We wanted to open up, I guess, let me take a step back and make sure. So presenting with me is Valerie DeBellis from ECU, TK, Dr. Khan from UNC Charlotte, I'll be here, and of course, Dr. Yasaki from UNCG. So let's go on. The UNC Math Pathways Task Force put out recommendations for several different aspects of what contributes to a student's course through their math or path through their math courses of study. Everybody who's on here has seen this, but we wanted to make sure that we started with the recommendation for placement, and that was number 5 in our list of recommendations. If there's anyone on here who's unfamiliar with it, please let us know. We'll make sure to get you a copy. But it's pretty broad. The main thing is we wanted everyone to just reevaluate what you're doing to place students and make sure that it's effective. Now, in doing that, I guess moving forward from there, we asked all of our institutions to sign letters of commitment saying, look, these are the initial items that we want everyone to sign on and work on. And then there's some institutionally selective items in that letter of commitment. So what you're looking at, this is the number of institutions that selected items in the letter of commitment that related to placement. So there were 3 options: focus on adjusting placement standards, using collaborative advising technologies accessible by advisors and students, and then collaborating and aligning effective placement practices. So certain institutions may have chosen multiple options under here. Some institutions may not have chosen any. But hopefully you can see there's pretty, out of 17 institutions, there's pretty good focus on placement as an area where we can improve and the outcomes for students. Let's see, this is a little bit deeper breakdown. So actually, and I'm sorry, Val, I'm about to walk all over your slides. Val?
I am now unmuted.
Okay, there you go.
I have just dropped into the chat a file that we create here at NCEMPT. And I have to give kudos to Ellen Hilgo, who has created this document. And what this does is give all of us a picture of what the UNC system schools do with respect placement. And I encourage you to open that file now and take a moment to just glance through that, what the requirements are across the system. This is a 2020-21 perspective. And what I'm hoping you see is that if you happen to be a high school student trying to figure this out because you dream of going to a UNC school and you're trying to figure out what your math requirements are in order to start your degree program, it's quite challenging. It's a game of logic in the way that we are actually putting the information out there for students to understand what requirements are for placement. So with that as a backdrop, what we did in the beginning of May was send out a survey to our advisory board members to try to understand what changes were about to take place in 21-22 with respect to the current placement practices. 11 schools in our system responded. We just list them there, and what we found was the changes basically categorized into two options. 80% of our schools have used SAT, ACT scores for placement. Those schools have changed either by using additional criteria for placing students, and there's an example on the slide, where they're looking at high school grades in a particular course, for example, a B or higher in a Math 3 course, and a high school GPA higher than some number automatically places into a particular course. So either additional criteria are being put into placement policy, or placement testing is being used with ALEX or departmentally developed placement test. Some schools are requiring that all students take the placement test. Some schools are making placement optional, these placement tests optional. And so basically as you take a system vision, is that it is not clear how placement should go. We're all trying to determine it locally, and it's very different across the board. So this, I hope, will encourage more conversations about how placement policy might be viewed as a gate opener, so that we have more students being able to place into STEM courses. The second question that we talked about was where or how placement policy was really established. And I saw where we received information, mostly all the decisions are made internal to a math department, either by a department chair consulting advisors in the decision being made, or as a committee of people in the department advising the chair. But there was one place that seemed to suggest that there were external placement policies that were being made by an enrollment management or a university testing services that may be impacting policy for placement. Most are internal. Most establishing the placement policy are internal to the math department. And the third question that we talked about, the fourth question actually was collecting information on who were placement administrators or coordinators in the departments. But we asked the question about placement impacts, whether anyone has looked at subpopulations yet, and all schools, with the exception of one, said that we haven't had a chance to do this yet. And one school said that we are actually beginning to engage in this effort. So it's quite timely for impact for us to begin looking at subpopulations and how our placement policies are either helping people in or keeping people out.
So just to kind of emphasize what Val was just mentioning, out of the, when I mentioned the three different options under placement, that the institutionally selective options, out of our 17 institutions, only 2 did not choose something related to placement. So everybody is starting to really look at it. One of the things that our group in particular, the impact placement group, started to think about were the unique concerns that arise in post-COVID or in the era of COVID-19. So what aspects and what things related to placements are being impacted by COVID-19 for this specific subpopulation, that is for our African-American males? Ideas like equity, that's something that's certainly not strictly COVID related, but costs associated with taking these tests certainly could be strained, or the cost could become a bigger obstacle nowadays. We have access and where and how are students being assessed? That is, are they able to take the typical SAT or ACT tests? Are they using on-campus tests? And if they're taking or if they're expected to take on-campus tests, when and how do they do it? How do they access it if they may have limited ability to get to campus prior to classes starting? We considered ideas relating to, of course, accuracy of the tests, learning loss, that is the time between when they took the course that was responsible for them learning the content versus when they're being assessed on that content, or when the time from when they may take the placement assessment relative to graduation even. Are they taking it when they first arrive on campus? Is there an opportunity to take it before? And are those students able to take that opportunity? And then student support services. How are the students and the parents being assisted in the whole process? Again, this kind of can connect with, it all goes back to equity and what's available to support all of our students to be able to be placed accurately and ultimately just to be successful at school. So having said that, we'll start talking about some of our specific, what some of our specific institutions are doing relative to placement. And for that, we will start with Don Yasaki at UNCG.
Hi, thank you. So here at Greensboro, we were a bit lucky in the fact that we had started looking at this pre-COVID. So a lot of the things that we were able to get done, we were able to get done and out ahead of the pandemic. So this project started in early 2019. We were just looking at our existing placement test, and we were looking at data from 5 years previous. From institutional research, this was analyzed by our statistical consulting center. Basically, we were looking for any signal that could predict success in the first math course that students here at UNCG took. And basically, we found noise. On our campus, SAT scores, high school GPA, even the score on the previous math placement test, none of it seemed to effectively predict success in their first math course. So then in 2020, we started, the committee met to start thinking about a design and development for a calculus readiness diagnostic test. We were keen on the idea that we really wanted to diagnose the students' readiness for calculus rather than just placing them. Some of the main ideas in the design, we wanted it to be cost-free for the students. We wanted to only use open access, open education resources. We wanted it to be online so that students, incoming students could utilize the resources over the summer prior to entering UNCG. And so we developed in Canvas this calculus readiness diagnostic test. It was first deployed in spring of 2020 and summer 2020 for the incoming students for fall 2020 registration. So the students go to a website on our math department page to self-enroll into this Canvas organization for the CRDT. Once there, they go through initial diagnosis, some review modules, and a final assessment, and I'll show you a little bit about that. They're placed into one of three categories of pre-calculus, calculus with a support co-requisite course, or calculus with no need for support. And every semester after that, we continue to revise, rinse, repeat. So currently we're analyzing the results from the fall 2020 placement. The institutional research team here is doing a pretty deep dive into the data. They are looking at, even at the specific question level, whether certain questions are better predictors of success or not. So Corey, if you can go, yeah. So this page, oh, can you go back one? So this page that you're looking at here, this is the Canvas org. So on the left, those of you that are used to seeing Canvas, this is the landing page. The students are presented with a video where they can watch sort of the mechanics of what they should be doing. Like I said, the idea is they take some initial placement test just to see some initial diagnosis of their skills. The test is organized into, there's 7 major areas. Each area has a certain number of subtopics for a total of 36 subtopics. After they take the initial test, they look in their grade book, they click on the mastery level so that they can see which areas they need work in. Then they can go to the review modules. The review modules are broken up into these 7 major areas. They go through the review modules and the practice quizzes before taking their final attempt. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of what the review modules look like. And so I've just opened up, I have like the algebra topic area opened up, and you can see that the algebra topic has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 subtopics in there. Each of the subtopics comes with videos that were created here at UNCG, partially supported by the Frontier Set grant here. We have links to open source textbooks. We have practice problems that are also embedded in Canvas. So they're auto-graded and sort of randomized so that students can practice. There's a short quiz that they can take to check their mastery level before deciding that they've mastered that one area and move on to the other areas that they were diagnosed as weak in before taking their final attempt. I think that's it. And I'll turn it over to Val.
Yes, and ECU has taken, Don has been very, I'm very grateful to him for sharing his work at UNCG, and East Carolina has adapted that model into our placement test. The fact that we are both using Canvas was very easy to share the UNCG diagnostic, and we were able to adjust that design to meet the needs of our university. We had a committee of faculty members, and we adapted the design to fit the ECU student by splitting the UNCG model into a pre-calculus and a calculus test. And then we increased it by including another placement test for college algebra. So our version basically has 3 diagnostic sections where we place into college algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus. But the UNCG model is the pre-calculus and the calculus placement. We require each student to start at the college algebra placement, and I'll show you this in a second. And they move through each of the placement tests to be placed where they would like to go. Each one of those placement tests have an option of 2 attempts and an opportunity to remediate between them. Some of the student features that are in here in the Canvas course is ease for access, and the fact that it doesn't cost anything for students. There are no lockdown browsers or technical obstacles. It allows for automatic opportunity where the students will automatically be populated into the course. At the moment, we have 6,049 students enrolled, and this happens when a student pays their deposit to attend East Carolina. It automatically shows up on their Canvas, in their Canvas courses, and they are able to access that. To date, 424 students have tested and placed into one of those 3 courses. The Canvas course also has the mathematical support, and we also have live tutors available that students can schedule through that course in case they need some human support. This is staffed by graduate students, and there are particular times for that they're available. The administrative features are that it really has been an automatic situation where the students are populated automatically, and once they gain a passing score, the results are populated into Banner within 24 hours, and students can register for the math course that they qualify entry into. Okay, Corey, next slide. This is the 3 courses or the 3 tests that are in the East Carolina placement test, and the cutoff scores are listed and the scores for entry into it. So students choose to start. All of them have to start in the college algebra readiness, and the second, the pre-calculus test will open up automatically for any student who passes test 1. So they can take 1 or 2 attempts to get through it, and students have been placing into all 3 levels pretty seamlessly to date. Next slide. TK, I think it's up to you.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate the organizers for this opportunity to speak about our test. If you don't mind, Corey, maybe go to the next slide, then I think it'll be easier to come back to that. So I think that the presentation would be fairly straightforward given the background that both Don and Val has already provided. So we sort of, followed a very similar approach. We actually had a departmental placement test that's been around for a long time, paper version, and then we have been administering that. However, our campus usually uses SAT, SAT, and we do have a committee, faculty committee that worked on those threshold cutoffs and everything. So given those background, given the pandemic, we didn't really have any option but to switch over to Canvas and having an online version of the same test. And also, as you know, as Corey mentioned at the beginning, that placement, one of the issues is that many of our students may not have taken the tests. So we are getting, we have thousands of students that are incoming, including transfer students. So very large number of group that's coming in. And, what if they don't have the test scores? So this is a really major deal for us as for everyone else. So what we have done for our campus is that, and thanks to our coordinator of math placement, Jean-Marie Linker, we call her Relinker. She has really worked hard to put together a bank of the test bank for this in Canvas, and also provide the review. And it's very much, we also have been working with the previous model that has been presented, and I believe we talked with Val and a few other institutions and figure out how they're doing it. And from that, we just have come up with a bank of questions, and based on that in Canvas, also some review questions and modules, which I will explain in just a second. But what we would like to do for the plan for the fall is that take more like a hybrid approach, because if Alex becomes available, it's still in the works. We're trying to figure out the details of that. Anytime the Alex is available and accessible for our students, we will switch in a hybrid mode where some students will be also taking the Alex version, so that this will help us, have two groups taking placement exams using two different mechanisms, those scores. And we would like to just sort of make a comparison in the future, how effective our placement test that we have designed, right? And I think it's going to be very good for us in the future. Keep in mind that our paper version, only a couple of hundred students were taking, because we basically went with the SAT and NCT scores, right? So therefore now this year is going to be very different data, because everyone's going to take our homegrown one / possibly Alex, and we're going to compare those two groups and trying to see the efficacy of our test. Also, I think Alex can be a very good tool. So we are, again, this is our proposed idea. We are trying to figure out during the semester, maybe at the beginning, we could talk about, as one of our previous speakers talked about this, right? We could measure the scores at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester we're using Alex. So Alex provides this 5 tests that a student who is registered with Alex can take during the year, so we can utilize them. Also, I want to make it clear that if a student is, if they have an SAT and NCT score and they're able to place into something and they're happy with it, that's fine. But if they're not happy, then they would have to take our homegrown test. And then if they're still not happy, they can either use Alex or our modules for training, and then they could take it again, right? So that if they want to do that. So that's about 1 or 2 tests during the summer, for example, after our summer enrollments come through. And then later on in the semester, we still can use those other 3 or 4 that's left for a particular student in Alex. If we have Alex, then we just sort of measure them at the beginning and the end of the semester. So the next slide. Oh, can you go to the previous slide? Sorry. Yeah. So the one before, sorry, one before this one. Yeah, great, thank you. So this is how it looks. So Ree has really put together a nice package where if you look at, this is what appears in Canvas. So a student coming in, they would see that there's a step 1 algebra review, right? We're encouraging them. There's a very nice message, talk about, they really should, look at this algebra review seriously and take a practice test and just get started with things, right? And then they should also know the resources. We are requiring the respondents, so they also should know some of the resources for the IT and so on, as well as if there's an issue, where to begin. And then in the middle, you see in the middle, I put all the different reviews that we have, for algebra review, right? We have those modules that we has put together, and thanks to our previous presenters, Don and Val, they're sort of providing us with a lot of help in terms of how to do that. In terms of the test 1 and test 2, so we actually have just 2 versions, which is just the algebra, the test 1 that everybody has, and also a little bit of precalculus. So we sort of have 2 groups, not necessarily 3 groups. So that's how it looks for the student. So Could you go to the two more slides? So for the next 2 slides, I just want to talk about, just a segue to the next conversation about question and answer, is that how do we figure out a good environment for our students? As you know, it's been a real privilege to work not only with this particular panel, but also with the impact group within the Math Pathways, that's sort of discussing how to make sure that we have a good pipeline of students that are moving through, particularly African American male population. How do we make them successful? And as I'm not sure if you heard it, but our UNC Charlotte, recently we collected data, and it turns out that number of math majors we have from the underrepresented students are we're doing fairly well. We are ranked number 4 in the US and ranked number 1 within the UNC system. So people sort of asked during various meetings about what's happening within our campus. So I just wanted to build these 2 slides to just share with you. So I believe that I think it's just building an ecosystem, and everybody talked about today, talked about this, right? So there's so many things. I think that things maybe needs to be changed, and not only in the math department, maybe outside. Maybe what matters most is the network, right? That our students are coming through, and what kind of network they're sort of part of, and what kind of network information and other things that are happening outside of even the classroom, right? So I'm calling that an ecosystem. So I really need to have that kind of good system in place. So within the department, I would say that faculty, we have our undergraduate coordinator Kim, and just have a good classroom environment. So those are really important, important portion of that, where we have a collaborative learning. It's more like the culture, right, within the department. If you have a very collaborative faculty members, very collegial faculty members, and that's reflected in the classroom, and sort of everybody feels like, okay, they can learn from each other. I think that environment is very, very helpful. Sense of belonging, feeling like, okay, students that we are teaching, they feel like they're belonging to the classroom. Also, what advantages we have in Charlotte is that within our department, we have a research faculty, the math education research faculty. And in fact, one of their major focus is on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's really helps. We also have a lot of collaboration with the College of Education. And of course, I believe things start at the top, and I think that the vision by our provost, has a great vision, and has been going on before I came. I'm new here. I just came last semester. And also the same vision is shared by our dean. I think that really, really helps a lot. And there's a great implementation, by the university, sort of build that university-wide ecosystem by the provost office. So could you go to the next slide, please? So next, this slide is my last slide. So I'd just like to provide some information here. Professor Carl Whalen, the Associate Dean for Curriculum, really helped with this slide, with the information. So the provost office really has this ecosystem, right, in place. This is just only relevant to STEM, right? We have a student experience project, which is really an amazing project. And in fact, I participated this semester as a faculty member, and it was just an amazing experience to see how you can even build a syllabus and communicate with your students, and really helps a lot. And I really got a very good feedback, even though I was doing it for a graduate class. I was a very small graduate class. So that was very, very, very educational for me as well. So also we have a STEM Academy, which really many of our faculty participate. And the SAP project, we have 35 of our math faculty who are participating this spring. So this is really, really good initiative for us. And this is all by the provost office. Transforming STEM education, learning academy really helps a lot. Professional development of our faculty is really important, and faculty buy-in, as Dr. Gillespie has mentioned that very nicely for their campus. And also we have some peer-assisted learning program, preceptors, like we have students and TAs that are embedded in the class, and that really helps a lot. Those embedded students help them to go get the help they need. Okay. And also we have these programs, Building Better Brothers and Utah program for the summer program for incoming students, underrepresented students. And there's a list of those, LSAMP and SAFE. I don't have time to go through those in detail, but first, math and science, first learning community. So it's like first generation students and so on. So I think this is the ecosystem. And I think it's really outside. In many ways, it's not really inside of the classroom in the mathematics of it, but there's a bigger picture out there. And I think this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity and staying. I think I'm the last speaker of the session, I believe, right? Thank you very much.
So thank you, TK. So we wanted to, for the end of ours, we had just kind of crowdsourced some ideas, and there's some questions that's occurred to us, in particular, where we know that everyone's playing and trying to work through all of the different issues that impact placement for all of our students. But in particular, how might those procedures that your institution is using, if it's not in line, say, with one of the three that were presented here, how might they impact minority populations, both in negatively and positively? There may be a procedure you put together that's going to be beneficial. So we wanted to get some ideas and get some feedback on what's happening across the system. We're gonna open up, of course, for general comments here, but you please feel free to use the Jamboard as well. We'll try and copy and get things pasted over there so that we can have them for later. But what kind of processes are in place at your institution? What kind of issues or obstacles have you come across that might inadvertently negatively affect minority populations, in particular minority males? And how might we assess the level of inequity in these tools and procedures? So we're wondering about all of these, both from our perspective with the placement committee, but also with an eye to perhaps inform the grant committee. So I'll stop talking now and open up the floor for comments. I'm working on getting my chat back up. I can't see the chat itself if anyone's putting anything in there.
Corey, I had a question I posted in the Jamboard. I'm wondering if anybody is proctoring their placement tests.
So I can answer for UNCG. So we do not proctor the placement test. It's timed, but the students are allowed to just log on to Canvas at any time. What we found is the placement test, the diagnostic, it doesn't give the student course credit. And so I think the motivation to score higher to take a harder math class isn't really there. And I think the messaging that's coming from advising, the messaging that we're sending out has been really, what we're trying to do is diagnose areas of weakness for the student so that they can be best prepared to take on the course that we're suggesting. And so what we've at least anecdotally found is that some of the students are worried that they might accidentally place too high because it is a multiple choice test. And so we adjusted our messaging to make it clear that students that place into calculus without support can take the support course if they feel like they need it. Or they can even drop back to pre-calculus, although we don't recommend that. But yeah, we don't proctor it here at UNCG.
Don, one other thing, I think it was in your presentation, but I just wanted to emphasize how I guess there's not really a need to cheat based on how you're placing the score requirements.
Right. Oh, right. So the cutoff score requirements, we don't advertise this to the students, but in order to place into the pre-calculus course, they just need a non-zero score on a 36 question multiple choice test. And so it's really hard for them not to place into at least one of the STEM tracks.
At ECU, we do not have proctoring, but we do have cutoff scores.
A question for all the campuses that are using that test retest option with review in between. I'm wondering whether you've at all looked at the time students are spending reviewing between test and retest, and whether you have any sense, either through analysis or gut, about whether there's differences relating to race, ethnicity, generational status in terms of how likely students are to take the first score and go into that class versus try and relearn and move into a more advanced class.
So that's part of the deep dive that the institutional research team here is doing on our first semester of data. They're looking to see how long they spend in each review modules, whether it does actually improve their score in that corresponding area. Which types of students actually just, as you said, take one test and take the course without ever trying to remediate. They're looking at all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know when you're going to get the data on that? You may have said that and I may have missed it.
No, so we're hoping to get it by the end of the summer.
Yeah. I'd like to add that Canvas is really nice because all of that data is in there, right? And it is kept every keystroke, every length of time that a student spends. You can see which students. We've had one student at East Carolina do all the practice quizzes, but never take a test. So I thought that was very interesting, but all of that data is really within this Canvas course, and it will be traceable.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Observations? Okay, well, if you have them, if it comes to you later, the Jamboard I think will still be available, so you can post them in there and it'll help guide our work. I'd like to thank everybody for all of their presentations. They've been fantastic. And hopefully don't disappear yet, because like I said, we are going to try and do our picture. Michelle, did you have any comments that you wanted to make?
No, I just thank everybody for coming and participating. I think this has been a great couple of half days, and I'm just sitting here thinking about where I will post the recordings and the Jamboard, and I guess the leadership team will have to help me figure that out later, but I'll let everybody know. So yes, we did a quick picture on Monday. It was fun. We will go ahead and do another quick picture. And I don't know if anybody can outdo Corey's background, but I think we did a serious picture and a fun picture. So we can let's just do the fun picture. That's actually better. So, and I have to do two because I have two screens. Okay, so we'll do, I'll tell you when. Okay. So we're going to do my first screen one. Everybody do something fun. Okay, let me do one more of those and go to the second screen. And these will be put in your P&T files. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3, go. Thank you. All right, we got our group picture. Hopefully next time we do a summit, we may be in person, although I think a lot of people like this, the ease with which we can do this. So we will try to work more of these in. Jeff says that will be the bright spot. All right. Happy Memorial Weekend, everybody. I hope everybody's getting a long weekend and getting some much deserved R&R.
Absolutely.
Except for Karen, who's busy writing.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this session. It was great. Thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you very much as well, everyone.
Yes. Y'all have a good summer.
You too.
We're going to see you, Dr. Gillespie. There goes everybody.
Michelle, did you want to stop recording?
Sure, why not?